Gaslighting is not just lying, it is something more subtle, more strategic, more dangerous. It is when someone makes you question your own reality, not by shouting, not by obvious manipulation, but by slowly, repeatedly, confidently telling you that what you saw, what you felt, what you experienced didn't happen, or didn't happen the way you think it did. And the most dangerous part, gaslighting is psychological manipulation designed to create doubt. Doubt in your memory, doubt in your perception, doubt in your judgment. And once doubt enters your mind, because a person who doesn't trust themselves will start trusting the manipulator instead. It sounds like this. That never happened. You're too sensitive. You always overact. You're imagining things. Notice something. The focus is never on the behavior, it's always on you. Gaslighting shifts attention away from accountability and places it on your supposed instability. And if you're not careful, you'll start defending your sanity instead of addressing the problem. Here's how it works. You confront someone about something that hurt you. Instead of listening, they deny it, confidently. Then they add a twist. They question your memory. They minimize your feelings. They imply you're irrational. And now the conversation isn't about what they did. It's about whether you're overreacting. That shift is intentional. Gaslighting survives on confusion. The more confused you are, the less confident you become. And the less confident you become, the easier you are to control. So how do you deal with it? First, regulate yourself. Gaslighters want emotional reactions. If you explode, they point to your reaction as proof that you're unstable. If you cry, they call you dramatic. If you get frustrated, they say you're aggressive. Calm disrupts the strategy. When you stay composed, you refuse to become evidence for their narrative. Second, anchor yourself to facts. Gaslighting attacks memory, so protect it. Write things down. Save messages. Keep track of events. Not to obsess, but to ground. Creeps in. You don't rely on emotion. You rely on evidence. Third, stop over-explaining. Gaslighters thrive when you try to convince them. You repeat yourself. You clarify. You defend. But understand this. Someone committed to misunderstanding you cannot be persuaded by better wording. State your experience once. I remember it differently. That's not how I experienced it. We'll see this differently. You don't need their agreement to validate your reality. Fourth, recognize the pattern. Gaslighting is rarely a one-time event. It is repeated distortion. If every conflict ends with you apologizing for something you didn't do, if every discussion leaves you doubting yourself, if you constantly feel confused after conversations, that's not miscommunication. That's manipulation. And awareness is power. Fifth, set boundaries. You can say, if you continue denying my experience, this conversation ends. If you speak to me that way, I'm leaving. And then follow through. Boundaries are not threats. They are standards. Finally, understand this truth. You will not win by out-arguing a gaslighter. You win by refusing to play the game. You win by trusting yourself, by strengthening your clarity, by limiting access if necessary. Gaslighting only works when you abandon your own perception, so hold on to it. You do not need someone else to confirm what you felt. You were there. You heard it. You experienced it. And adulthood is not about convincing everyone you're right. It's about standing steady, even when someone tries to make you doubt your own ground. Gaslighting loses power the moment you stop questioning your sanity and start questioning their pattern. And that shift from doubt to awareness is where your control returns. Gaslighting distorts reality in a way that is subtle enough to confuse you and powerful enough to destabilize you. It is not loud manipulation. It is not always aggressive. In fact, it often sounds calm, confident, and controlled. That is what makes it dangerous. It does not attack your character directly at first. It attacks your perception. It makes you question what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, and eventually what you believe about yourself. When someone gaslights you, they are not simply disagreeing with you. Disagreement is normal. Two people can experience the same event differently. Gaslighting goes further. It denies your experience entirely. It replaces your memory with theirs. It insists repeatedly that your version of reality is flawed. And if that insistence is consistent and confident enough, doubt begins to form. It often starts small. You bring up something that bothered you. They respond, "That never happened." You pause. You replay the memory in your mind. You are certain it happened. But their certainty makes you hesitate. Then they add something else. You're remembering it wrong. Now the focus shifts. The issue is no longer what occurred. The issue becomes your reliability. Over time, these moments accumulate. You begin to preface statements with uncertainty. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think you said. I might be overreacting. That hesitation is not accidental. It is the result of repeated distortion. When someone consistently challenges your recollection of events, your confidence in your own mind weakens. Gaslighting does not just question memory, it questions perception. You express hurt and you are told you are too sensitive. You point out disrespect and you are told you are dramatic. You notice inconsistency and you are told you are paranoid. The emotional message underneath is clear: your reactions cannot be trusted. Eventually, you begin filtering your emotions through their approval. You wait to see how they interpret the situation before deciding how you feel about it. This is where the distortion becomes deeply psychological. When you stop trusting your own perception, you outsource reality to someone else. You begin asking them what happened instead of relying on your own awareness. You allow their narrative to override your intuition. And slowly, your internal stability erodes. One of the most damaging effects of gaslighting is cognitive dissonance. You feel something strongly, but you are told it is not real. That internal conflict creates anxiety. Your body responds to what it experienced, but your mind is pressured to dismiss it. This tension can make you feel confused, disoriented, even ashamed. You may start apologizing for reactions that were completely reasonable. Gaslighting also isolates you internally. You may hesitate to share your concerns with others because you are unsure if your experience is valid. You might think, maybe it is just me. That self-doubt prevents you from seeking perspective. The manipulator's version of reality becomes dominant simply because it is louder and more persistent. It is important to recognize that gaslighting relies on repetition. One denial might create frustration. Repeated denial creates instability. When every disagreement ends with your memory being questioned, the pattern becomes psychologically exhausting. You start avoiding confrontation because it leaves you feeling mentally drained. Another layer of distortion involves rewriting history. A gaslighter may change details of past events to support their current argument. They might say, "You agreed to that when you did not," or "You were fine with it before," when you express concerns. If challenged, they double down. Confidence becomes their weapon. The more assertive they are, the more you second-guess yourself. This process can lead to something even more concerning: self-monitoring. You begin scrutinizing your own thoughts constantly. You replay conversations obsessively to check for mistakes. You question whether your feelings are justified. Instead of focusing on the behavior that hurt you, you focus on whether you are interpreting it correctly. That internal hypervigilance is exhausting. Gaslighting distorts reality because it blurs the line between truth and narrative. It replaces shared understanding with controlled storytelling. The manipulator frames events in a way that protects them and destabilizes you. If you challenge it, they imply you are confused. If you insist, they escalate the doubt. The goal is not resolution. The goal is control. Control becomes easier when you lack confidence in your perception. Decisions become harder. Boundaries feel uncertain. You hesitate to act because you are unsure if your concerns are legitimate. That hesitation benefits the person distorting reality. The less certain you are, the more influence they gain. Recognizing this distortion is the first step toward reclaiming stability. Understanding that repeated denial and minimization are tactics, not truth, helps restore clarity. Your memory may not be perfect, but consistent self-doubt introduced by someone else is not a coincidence. When confusion becomes a pattern after interactions with the same person, it is worth questioning the pattern rather than questioning yourself. Gaslighting works by planting seeds of doubt and watering them with repetition. It turns normal disagreement into psychological instability. It makes you question your memory, your perception, and eventually your sanity. And the longer it continues unchecked, the more disconnected you become from your own inner voice. Confusion is the primary tool. The goal is control through self-doubt. Gaslighting does not begin with obvious domination. It begins with subtle destabilization. It does not try to overpower you physically or socially at first. It attempts to quietly weaken your certainty. Because once certainty weakens, control becomes easier. Confusion is powerful because it interrupts clarity. When you are clear, you make decisions quickly. You set boundaries firmly. You speak confidently. But when confusion enters the picture, hesitation follows. You start second-guessing. You pause before responding. You wonder if you misunderstood. That hesitation is the opening manipulation needs. Gaslighting thrives in that opening. Imagine confronting someone about something specific. You remember the words. You remember the tone. You remember how it made you feel. Instead of addressing the issue, they deny it entirely. Not casually, but confidently. That never happened. You feel a flicker of doubt. Then they add, now confusion grows. Your mind replays the moment, searching for error. That internal search is exactly what creates vulnerability. When confusion becomes consistent, self-doubt follows. You begin questioning not just one event, but your overall perception. You might start thinking, maybe I do exaggerate. Or, maybe I'm too sensitive. The manipulator does not need to directly call you unstable if they can guide you into questioning your own stability. Self-doubt weakens boundaries. When you are unsure of your memory or perception, it becomes harder to stand firm. You hesitate before confronting. You soften your tone. You overexplain. You apologize unnecessarily. That shift changes the power dynamic. The person creating confusion becomes a reference point for truth. Confusion also disrupts emotional clarity. If you feel hurt but are repeatedly told there was nothing hurtful, your emotions start to feel unreliable. You may suppress them. You may dismiss them. Over time, you disconnect from your intuition. And when intuition weakens, decision-making suffers. The strategy is subtle because it is layered. First, deny the event, then question the memory, then minimize the reaction. Finally, imply instability. Each layer increases uncertainty. Each layer reduces confidence. The more uncertain you become, the more dependent you are on the manipulator's version of reality. Control through self-doubt is effective because it removes the need for overt force. If someone doubts themselves enough, they will regulate their own behavior to avoid conflict. They will stop asking questions. They will stop challenging inconsistencies. They will start adapting to avoid being labeled dramatic or irrational. Another element of confusion is contradiction. A gaslighter may say one thing today and the opposite tomorrow. If confronted, they deny the earlier statement. This creates cognitive strain. You try to reconcile conflicting memories. That strain is exhausting. Exhaustion reduces resistance. Confusion also isolates. When you are unsure of your own experience, you hesitate to seek outside perspective. You might think, what if I'm wrong? That hesitation keeps the manipulation contained. The fewer external voices you involve, the stronger the internal doubt becomes. It is important to recognize that confusion feels uncomfortable for a reason. Humans are wired for coherence. We seek patterns and consistency. When someone consistently disrupts that consistency, it creates anxiety. That anxiety makes you more likely to accept simplified explanations even if they are false. If the manipulator offers a clean narrative that resolves the tension, you may accept it just to regain stability. This is why clarity is threatening to someone who relies on confusion. Clear statements like, "That's not how I remember it," or "I disagree with that version," interrupt the tactic. Calm repetition of your experience reduces the space for distortion. Confusion loses strength when confronted with steady confidence. Self-doubt, once internalized, can persist beyond the relationship. You may find yourself questioning decisions in unrelated areas of life. You may hesitate in conversations, double-check simple memories, or seek reassurance excessively. That lingering uncertainty is evidence of how deeply confusion can root itself. Breaking that cycle requires intentional awareness. Notice patterns of denial. Notice how often you leave conversations feeling unsure rather than resolved. Notice if your confidence consistently drops around a specific person. Patterns reveal strategy. The goal of confusion is not mutual misunderstanding. It is imbalance. When one person defines reality and the other questions it, imbalance exists. And imbalance creates leverage. Reclaiming clarity starts with trusting your perception again. It does not mean assuming you are always right. It means recognizing that consistent confusion introduced by someone else is not accidental, it is a tool. And when you identify the tool, its power decreases. Control through self-doubt depends on repetition and silence. When you challenge confusion calmly, when you document events, when you anchor to facts, when you involve external perspective, the distortion weakens. Self-doubt begins to fade when certainty is practiced. Confusion may be the primary tool, but awareness dismantles it. The moment you recognize that the doubt you feel is being cultivated rather than coincidental, You step out of passive uncertainty and into conscious observation. And observation restores strength that confusion tried to steal. Patterns reveal manipulation. One incident can be misunderstanding. Two incidents can be tension, but repeated denial, blame shifting, and minimization are not accidents. They are signals. Manipulation rarely announces itself loudly. It hides inside repetition. It depends on you focusing on each individual moment instead of stepping back to observe the pattern. Denial is often the first red flag. You bring up a specific behavior, and it is immediately rejected. Not discussed, not explored, rejected. That never happened. I didn't say that. You're making things up. If this response appears once, it may be confusion. If it appears consistently, it becomes strategy. Repeated denial is not about clarity. It is about erasing accountability. When denial becomes habitual, something important happens psychologically. You begin to question your own recollection. Instead of standing firmly in what you experienced, you hesitate. You replay conversations in your head. You look for gaps in your memory. That hesitation shifts power. The focus moves away from their behavior and onto your supposed inaccuracy. Blame shifting is another consistent pattern that exposes manipulation. Instead of addressing the concern you raise, the conversation pivots. Suddenly, you are the problem. If you hadn't reacted that way, I wouldn't have done it. You're the one who started this. You always take things too personally. Notice the redirection. The issue is no longer their action. It is your reaction. Blame shifting creates emotional confusion. You entered the conversation with a specific concern. Now you are defending yourself instead. The original issue fades into the background. Manipulation thrives when focus is diverted. If they can keep you explaining, defending, or apologizing, they avoid accountability entirely. Minimization adds another layer. Even when behavior is acknowledged, its impact is reduced. You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Minimization teaches you to doubt the validity of your feelings. It implies that your emotional response is exaggerated. Over time, you may start suppressing concerns to avoid being labeled dramatic. When denial, blame shifting, and minimization occur together repeatedly, the pattern becomes clear. First, deny. If denial fails, shift blame. If blame fails, minimize. Each tactic serves the same purpose: avoid responsibility and destabilize your certainty. Patterns reveal intention more clearly than isolated moments ever could. The danger lies in focusing too closely on individual incidents. You might think, maybe I misunderstood that one situation. Or, that reasoning keeps you engaged in case-by-case analysis. Manipulation depends on that narrow focus. When you zoom out and observe repetition, clarity emerges. Patterns also affect your emotional state. If you consistently leave conversations feeling confused, guilty, or unsure of yourself, that is information. Healthy conflict may feel uncomfortable, but it does not consistently distort your sense of reality. Manipulative patterns, however, produce recurring self-doubt. It is important to distinguish between accountability and manipulation. In healthy relationships, both people can admit fault, both can reflect, both can apologize without deflecting. In manipulative dynamics, accountability flows in one direction. You apologize more often. You adjust more frequently. You question yourself more intensely. That imbalance is not coincidence. Repeated denial can also escalate into rewriting history. Events are reframed in ways that consistently favor the manipulator. Your concerns are portrayed as irrational. Their actions are portrayed as reasonable. Over time, you may begin to rely on their interpretation instead of your own memory. That reliance increases their influence. Blame shifting often includes emotional tactics. They may accuse you of being unfair, controlling, or ungrateful when you raise valid issues. This emotional pressure can make you hesitate to bring up concerns in the future. Silence benefits manipulation. The less you question, the easier it becomes to maintain control. Minimization may appear subtle, but its impact accumulates. When your feelings are repeatedly dismissed, you may internalize the belief that they are excessive. That internalization weakens boundaries. If your emotions are unreliable, how can you enforce limits confidently? That is the hidden consequence of consistent minimization. Recognizing patterns requires emotional distance. Instead of reacting to each incident, observe frequency. Ask yourself how often denial occurs, how often blame is redirected, how often your experience is dismissed. Frequency reveals truth. Patterns expose strategy. It is also helpful to notice your own behavioral changes. Have you started documenting conversations to reassure yourself? Do you rehearse discussions in your mind to avoid being caught off guard? Do you feel anxious before addressing concerns? These adjustments may indicate repeated destabilization. Manipulation depends on repetition because repetition normalizes behavior. What once felt shocking becomes routine. What once felt unacceptable becomes tolerable. Patterns gradually reshape expectations. That is why awareness must interrupt repetition. When you identify repeated denial, blame shifting, and minimization, you are not being overly critical, you are being observant. Observation restores balance. Instead of questioning yourself, you begin questioning the consistency of the other person's responses. That shift reclaims clarity. Patterns reveal manipulation because manipulation requires consistency to be effective. It cannot survive in isolated moments. It depends on accumulation. When you step back and see the accumulation clearly, the confusion begins to dissolve. And once confusion fades, control weakens. Emotional regulation is essential when dealing with manipulation because the moment you lose control of your emotions, you lose control of the direction of the conversation. Manipulative people rely on reaction. They provoke, they exaggerate, they distort, and then they wait. They wait for you to explode, defend, panic, or overexplain. The stronger your emotional reaction, the easier it becomes for them to redirect the focus away from their behavior and toward your response. Staying calm is not about suppressing emotion. It is about managing it. There is a difference between feeling anger and being controlled by anger. When you are emotionally regulated, you can feel frustration without raising your voice. You can feel hurt without collapsing into self-doubt. You can feel confusion without surrendering your clarity. That control protects you from being pulled into someone else's narrative. Manipulative dynamics often follow a predictable cycle. A statement is made that challenges your memory or perception. You react emotionally because the statement feels unfair or inaccurate. Your emotional reaction is then used as evidence that you are unstable, dramatic, or irrational. The original issue disappears. The spotlight shifts to your tone, your intensity, your reaction. Emotional regulation interrupts that cycle. When you remain calm, you force the conversation to stay on substance. Instead of escalating, you respond with steady language. Instead of defending every accusation, you ask simple, direct questions. Calmness slows the pace. Manipulation thrives in emotional chaos. It weakens in emotional steadiness. Calm communication also protects your credibility. When you speak evenly and clearly, your words carry more weight. Emotional intensity can sometimes dilute your message because the focus shifts to how you are speaking rather than what you are saying. Regulation keeps the focus where it belongs, on facts and behavior. This does not mean you should tolerate disrespect. Emotional regulation is not passive. It is controlled strength. It is choosing not to match volatility with volatility. It is refusing to let someone else's instability dictate your behavior. When you stay composed, you demonstrate self-control, and self-control is power. Manipulators often attempt to trigger specific emotions: guilt, fear, anger, insecurity. They may accuse you unfairly, dismiss your concerns, or raise their voice to provoke a reaction. If you respond impulsively, you step into the trap. If you pause, breathe, and respond intentionally, you step out of it. Pausing is one of the simplest yet most effective tools. Silence can feel uncomfortable, especially in tense conversations. But a brief pause before responding allows your nervous system to settle. It prevents automatic reactions. It creates space between stimulus and response. That space is where regulation lives. Your tone matters. A steady tone communicates confidence. When you speak without trembling defensiveness or explosive anger, you signal that you are not easily destabilized. This can discourage further attempts to provoke you because the tactic is no longer effective. Emotional regulation also protects your internal clarity. When you are highly emotional, your thinking narrows. You may struggle to articulate your thoughts clearly. You may forget important points. You may agree to things you later regret simply to end the conflict. Staying calm keeps your thinking organized and your boundaries intact. Regulation is especially important when someone attempts to rewrite events. If you respond with outrage, the discussion may spiral into arguments about attitude rather than accuracy. If you respond calmly, you can repeat your position without escalating. Consistency paired with calmness strengthens your stance. It is also important to regulate your body, not just your words. Slow breathing, relaxed posture, and steady eye contact signal composure. Physical calm reinforces mental calm. When your body is tense and reactive, your mind often follows. When your body is grounded, your mind stabilizes. Remaining calm does not guarantee that the other person will change. Regulation is not about controlling them. It is about controlling yourself. Even if they continue denying, deflecting, or minimizing, your emotional steadiness prevents further damage to your self-trust. You leave the conversation knowing you handled yourself with discipline. Over time, consistent regulation changes the dynamic. If someone cannot provoke you easily, their usual strategies lose impact. They may escalate briefly in an attempt to regain control, but without emotional fuel, the escalation often fades. Emotional fuel is what sustains manipulation. It is also worth recognizing that regulation requires practice. If you have been repeatedly destabilized, strong emotional reactions may feel automatic. That does not mean you are weak. It means your nervous system has been activated repeatedly. Learning to calm it is a skill. Skills can be developed. Remind yourself that you do not have to respond immediately to every accusation. You can say, "I need a moment to think about that." You can say, "Let's come back to the original issue." You can disengage if the conversation becomes unproductive. Calm does not mean captive. It means controlled. When you stay regulated, you protect your narrative. You do not allow your emotions to be weaponized against you. You speak clearly. You listen carefully. You respond deliberately. You refuse to let chaos define the exchange. Emotional regulation is essential because it keeps you anchored in reality. It allows you to observe patterns without being consumed by them. It strengthens your boundaries without escalating conflict. And most importantly, it ensures that your behavior reflects your values, not someone else's attempts to destabilize you. When someone consistently distorts conversations, denies previous statements, or reframes events to make you question your own memory, one of the strongest tools you have is documentation. Not to win an argument, not to build a case in secret, but to anchor yourself to reality. Gaslighting survives in vagueness. It feeds on blurred timelines, shifting stories, and emotional pressure. Facts interrupt that fog. Documentation is not dramatic. It is disciplined. It can be as simple as saving messages, writing down dates, or keeping brief notes after important conversations. The purpose is not obsession. The purpose is clarity. When your memory is challenged repeatedly, written evidence becomes an external stabilizer. It protects your sense of truth when someone tries to erode it. Emotional pressure is powerful. When a person speaks with confidence, urgency, or indignation, it can make you doubt yourself even if you were certain moments earlier. Tone can feel more convincing than truth. That is why anchoring to evidence matters. Evidence does not raise its voice. It does not manipulate. It simply exists. When you document interactions, you reduce reliance on memory alone. Memory can be influenced by stress. Under pressure, details can feel fuzzy. A manipulative person knows this. They may say, "That's not what I said," or "You're remembering it wrong," or "You're too sensitive." Without a reference point, you may begin to second-guess yourself. But when you can calmly look at what was actually written or previously agreed upon, your internal stability strengthens. Anchoring to facts also changes the tone of confrontation. Instead of arguing emotionally, you can respond with specifics. "On Tuesday you said this. Here is the message. This was the agreement." Specificity narrows the room for distortion. It keeps the discussion focused. It prevents the conversation from drifting into vague accusations or character attacks. Documentation is especially useful in professional settings where accountability matters. Following up verbal conversations with written summaries can protect you. Sending a calm email that says, "Just confirming our discussion and next steps," creates a clear record. If someone later attempts to deny or alter the agreement, the record speaks for itself. There is a psychological benefit to documentation that goes beyond proof. It reassures your nervous system. When you are repeatedly told that your perception is flawed, self-trust weakens. Self-trust is foundational. When it erodes, anxiety increases. Having documented evidence can restore that trust. It reminds you that your observations are grounded. However, documentation must be paired with restraint. The goal is not to constantly present evidence in every minor disagreement. That can escalate conflict unnecessarily. The goal is to have clarity when needed. Quiet confidence in facts is more powerful than aggressive proof. You do not need to overwhelm someone with receipts. You need enough clarity to remain steady. Anchoring to facts also helps you separate emotion from reality. Emotions are valid, but they are not always precise indicators of objective events. When someone manipulates, they may attempt to invalidate your feelings while simultaneously twisting the facts. Facts create a neutral reference point. They allow you to say, regardless of how this feels, this is what happened. This approach requires discipline because emotional pressure can feel urgent. In heated moments, the temptation is to defend yourself immediately and passionately. But stepping back and reviewing the facts slows the pace. It brings the conversation back to substance. It prevents escalation fueled by assumption. It is also important to document patterns, not just isolated incidents. Gaslighting is rarely about one conversation is repetitive. Keeping track of repeated denials, blame shifting, or contradictions reveals a larger picture. Patterns are harder to dismiss than single events. When you see repetition clearly, you are less likely to internalize blame. Trusting evidence over emotional pressure does not mean you become cold or detached. It means you prioritize accuracy over intensity. Someone may attempt to make you feel guilty for even referencing facts. They may say you are being dramatic or calculating. That response itself can be revealing. A reasonable person welcomes clarity. A manipulative person resists it. Documentation also strengthens boundaries. When you know what was said and agreed upon, you are less likely to accept revisionist narratives. You can calmly restate expectations without wavering. Consistency builds credibility. When you consistently refer back to clear agreements, you establish that reality cannot be casually rewritten. There may be moments when, even with evidence, the other person refuses to acknowledge truth. Documentation cannot force honesty. Its primary function is to protect you. It ensures that even if they continue to deny, you remain grounded. You do not spiral into doubt. You do not abandon your memory to accommodate their narrative. In personal relationships, documentation may feel uncomfortable at first. It can feel formal. But when confusion has become a recurring pattern, clarity becomes necessary. Writing down what was said immediately after a conversation can preserve accuracy before memory fades. It creates an anchor you can return to later. Over time, relying on facts builds internal resilience. You become less reactive because you are less uncertain. You speak with calm precision. You do not argue about feelings alone. You reference concrete details. That steadiness shifts power back to you. Trusting evidence over emotional pressure is not about winning arguments. It is about protecting your perception. It is about refusing to let intensity override truth. When conversations become distorted, facts provide structure. When doubt creeps in, documentation restores balance. And when someone attempts to blur reality, anchoring to what is verifiable keeps your footing firm. There comes a point when clarity is no longer enough. You have explained yourself, you have stayed calm, you have documented facts. And still, the behavior continues. That is when the focus must shift from persuasion to protection. You are not responsible for convincing someone to treat you with respect. You are responsible for deciding what you will tolerate. Boundaries are not threats, they are decisions. Many people hesitate to set boundaries because they hope that if they explain better, stay patient longer, or show more empathy, the other person will change. But persuasion assumes willingness. Manipulative behavior often thrives on the idea that you will keep trying to prove your worth or your point. Protection shifts that dynamic. Protection says, this is where I stop. A boundary is not loud. It does not require anger. It does not need long speeches. In fact, the strongest boundaries are simple and consistent. I'm not comfortable with that. If this continues, I will leave the conversation. I won't engage when I'm being spoken to like this. Calm statements delivered without hostility carry more weight than emotional ultimatums. The purpose of a boundary is not to control someone else's behavior. It is to define your response to it. That distinction matters. You cannot force someone to stop distorting reality or dismissing your concerns. But you can control whether you remain available for it. Boundaries are about access. They determine how much of you someone gets. When boundaries are ignored repeatedly, distance becomes necessary. Distance is not revenge. It is not punishment. It is space created for your own stability. That space can be emotional, conversational, or physical depending on the situation. Reducing contact, limiting topics of discussion, or disengaging from unnecessary interactions are all forms of protective distance. Creating distance can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to over-explaining or over-accommodating. You may worry about appearing cold or dramatic. But protecting your mental clarity is not cruelty. It is maturity. Sometimes the healthiest response is not another conversation, it is less access. Distance also reveals patterns more clearly. When you step back, you can observe behavior without being constantly immersed in it. You notice how often denial happens, you recognize recurring blame shifting. Space reduces emotional noise, it strengthens perspective. There will be resistance. People who benefit from blurred boundaries rarely accept new limits easily. They may accuse you of overreacting. They may attempt to guilt you into reverting to old patterns. That reaction is not evidence that your boundary is wrong. Often it is confirmation that the boundary was necessary. Consistency is critical. A boundary set once but not enforced becomes a suggestion. When you say you will leave a conversation if it becomes disrespectful, you must follow through. Not dramatically, not with hostility, simply by ending the interaction calmly. Over time, consistency teaches others that your limits are real. Protection over persuasion also means releasing the need for agreement. You do not need someone to understand your boundary in order for it to stand. They may disagree with it. They may minimize it. They may mock it. Your boundary is still valid. It is not a negotiation, it is a standard. Distance is sometimes the only sustainable solution when patterns persist. Continuing to expose yourself to repeated manipulation erodes self-trust. Limiting exposure preserves it. This may mean fewer conversations. It may mean avoiding certain environments. In more serious cases, it may mean ending the relationship entirely. That decision is not impulsive when it follows consistent patterns of harm. Boundaries protect your energy. Emotional manipulation is exhausting. It forces you to constantly defend, clarify, and stabilize. When you reduce access, you reduce that drain. Your energy can then be redirected toward growth, stability, and healthier connections. It is important to recognize that they're not walls built out of fear. They are filters built out of wisdom. They allow healthy interactions to continue while restricting harmful ones. They are flexible when appropriate and firm when necessary. They are guided by self-respect, not resentment. Protection also includes internal boundaries. Refusing to internalize distorted narratives. Refusing to accept blame that does not belong to you. Refusing to engage in circular arguments. These internal limits are just as important as external ones. They shape how deeply manipulation can reach. Creating distance does not mean you stop caring. It means you care about your stability enough to prioritize it. You can wish someone well from afar. You can acknowledge their struggles without sacrificing your clarity. Compassion does not require proximity. When you choose protection over persuasion, you reclaim agency. You stop trying to win debates that were never about truth. You stop chasing validation from someone committed to distortion. You focus instead on preserving your peace. Boundaries and distance are not dramatic acts. They are disciplined choices. They communicate that access to you is conditional on respect. They demonstrate that your mental clarity matters. And they reinforce a simple truth: your responsibility is not to convince someone to treat you well, but to ensure that you do not remain where you are consistently treated otherwise.